The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as thousands of tourists gathered for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Jake Morrison, a 23-year-old college student from Texas, who had saved up for months to take this dream trip to London with his girlfriend Sarah and best friend Mike. Jake pulled out his phone and started recording as the iconic red-uniformed guards marched into position. Their tall black bearskin hats stood perfectly straight, and their faces remained completely emotionless. The tourists around them whispered in amazement at how still and professional these guards looked. "Dude, they look like statues," Jake whispered to Mike, zooming in with his camera. "I bet they don't even blink." Sarah shook her head nervously. "Jake, maybe we should just watch respectfully. These guys are actual soldiers, not performers." But Jake was already getting ideas. He had seen videos online of tourists trying to make the guards laugh or break character. Some people would make funny faces, tell jokes, or even try to touch the guards. Most of the time, nothing happened, and Jake thought it would make great content for his social media. The ceremony began with the familiar sound of drums and military music. The new guards marched in perfect formation while the old guards prepared to hand over their duties. Every movement was precise and practiced, showing years of military training and discipline. As the tourists pressed closer to get better photos, Jake noticed how the guards never seemed to acknowledge the crowd. They stared straight ahead with incredible focus, ignoring the hundreds of camera flashes and excited chatter around them. Their rifles were held at exactly the same angle, and their posture was absolutely perfect. "This is so cool," Mike said, genuinely impressed by the display of military precision. "My dad was in the army, and he always told me about discipline like this." Jake nodded but was thinking about something else entirely. He had noticed that one particular guard seemed younger than the others, maybe closer to his own age. The guard was stationed near the palace entrance, and Jake could get pretty close to him if he wanted to. After the main ceremony ended, most tourists began to disperse, but Jake lingered around the palace gates. He watched as several guards remained at their posts, continuing their duty of protecting the royal residence. These weren't just ceremonial positions. These men were highly trained soldiers, responsible for the security of one of the most important buildings in Britain. "Come on, let's go see Big Ben," Sarah suggested, tugging on Jake's arm. "We only have a few days here, and there's so much to see." But Jake was fixated on the young guard near the entrance. The soldier stood perfectly still, his eyes focused on some distant point, completely ignoring the remaining tourists who were taking selfies nearby. Jake had an idea that he thought would make an amazing video for his Instagram and TikTok accounts. "Just give me 5 minutes," Jake said, pulling away from Sarah. "I want to try something." Mike looked worried. "Jake, what are you thinking? You're not going to do something stupid, are you?" Jake grinned and held up his phone. "Just trust me, this is going to go viral." What Jake didn't know was that these guards, officially called the Queen's Guard, undergo months of rigorous training. They're not just soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. They're active members of the British Army, often veterans of combat missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Their job is to protect the royal family and their residences, and they take this responsibility very seriously. The guard Jake was targeting had actually served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for this prestigious posting. His name was Private James Thompson, and he had earned this position through exceptional service and discipline. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace was considered one of the highest honors in the British military. As Jake approached with his phone recording, Private Thompson remained motionless. He had been trained to ignore distractions, whether they were screaming tourists, bad weather, or even medical emergencies. Only direct threats to security or orders from superior officers could break his focus. Jake stepped closer, now just a few feet from the guard. He started making silly faces at the camera while pointing at the stoic soldier behind him. Some other tourists stopped to watch, curious about what this American boy was planning to do. "Hey everyone, watch this," Jake announced loudly, making sure his phone was still recording. "I'm going to see if I can make this robot guard laugh." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had read about tourists getting in trouble for bothering the royal guards, and she knew this wasn't going to end well. But Jake was already committed to his plan. and nothing she said was going to stop him now. Jake started his performance by dancing around in front of Private Thompson, waving his arms and making exaggerated facial expressions. The guard's eyes never moved, not even a twitch. Other tourists began pulling out their phones to record Jake's antics, some laughing and others looking uncomfortable. "Come on, man, give me something," Jake said loudly, stepping even closer to the guard. "Just a little smile, a wink, anything." Private Thompson had dealt with this behavior countless times before. During his training, instructors had prepared him for every possible distraction. He had learned to maintain his composure even when tourists tried to provoke reactions. His mind was focused on his duty, scanning for real security threats while ignoring Jake's childish behavior. Mike watched, nervously from a distance, knowing his friend well enough to predict that Jake wouldn't stop at just making faces. Sure enough, Jake escalated his performance by pulling out a banana from his backpack and pretending to offer it to the guard like he was feeding a zoo animal. "Here you go, buddy," Jake said mockingly, holding the banana near the guard's face. "You must be hungry standing here all day like a statue." A few British tourists in the crowd began shaking their heads disapprovingly. They understood the respect and dignity these guards deserved, and they were embarrassed by Jake's behavior. One elderly British woman whispered to her husband, "Americans have no sense of respect." Jake noticed he was drawing a bigger audience, which only encouraged him more. He started telling jokes loudly, hoping to get some reaction from the stoic soldier. When that didn't work, he began singing popular songs off-key while dancing around the guard post. "Maybe he's deaf," Jake announced to his growing audience. "Let me try getting his attention a different way." Sarah rushed over and grabbed Jake's arm. "Please stop this. You're embarrassing us. Let's just leave." But Jake shrugged her off too, caught up in his performance and the attention from other tourists. Some were cheering him on while others looked disgusted by his disrespectful behavior. Jake only focused on the encouragement, interpreting the mixed reactions as success. Private Thompson remained perfectly still, but inside he was growing increasingly irritated. These guards were trained to handle much worse situations, but that didn't make Jake's behavior any less annoying. The guard had been on duty since early morning, and he still had several hours left in his shift. Jake's next idea was to try mimicking the guard's posture and movements. He stood next to Private Thompson and tried to copy his stance, holding an imaginary rifle and putting on a serious expression. The crowd found this amusing, and Jake played up their laughter by marching back and forth in exaggerated military style. "Look at me. I'm a royal guard too," Jake announced, saluting dramatically, protecting the palace from dangerous bananas and tourist photos. What Jake didn't realize was that several palace security officers in plain clothes were watching his performance from nearby positions. They had been monitoring the situation since Jake first approached the guard post. Their job was to intervene if tourists became too disruptive or posed any potential security risk. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins was one of these undercover officers. She had been working palace security for over 10 years and had seen every type of tourist behavior imaginable. Most incidents were handled quietly with a simple warning, but Jake's prolonged disruption was becoming problematic. "Control, we have a situation developing at the main entrance," she spoke quietly into her hidden radio. "American tourist causing extended disruption to Guard Post 3, requesting guidance on intervention." The response came back immediately. "Continue. Monitoring. Intervene if behavior escalates or becomes physical contact." Jake was now taking selfies with the motionless guard, making peace signs and silly faces while positioning himself as close as possible to Private Thompson. He even tried to put his arm around the guard's shoulders for a photo, but stopped just short of actually touching him. "This is going to get me so many likes," Jake said to Mike, reviewing the photos on his phone. "My followers are going to love this content." Mike was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. "Jake, seriously, let's go. You've had your fun. This guy is just trying to do his job." But Jake was already planning his next move. He had seen online videos of tourists trying to get guards to break character by stepping on their feet or blocking their path when they marched. He was considering whether he should try something similar. Private Thompson could sense that the situation was building toward something more serious. His training had taught him to recognize escalating behavior patterns. Jake's actions were following a predictable progression from harmless jokes to more invasive attempts at interaction. The guard remained ready to respond appropriately if the situation required it. An older British man in the crowd finally spoke up loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Young man, that soldier deserves your respect, not your mockery. He served his country with honor." Jake turned toward the man with a dismissive laugh. "Relax, Grandpa, it's just harmless fun. These guys are paid to stand there and look pretty for tourists anyway." The British man's face reddened with anger. That guard has likely served in combat zones, risking his life for Queen and country. Show some bloody respect. Jake rolled his eyes and turned back to Private Thompson, now more determined than ever to get some kind of reaction. He had committed too much time and effort to this performance to give up now, especially with so many people watching and recording. What happened next would change everything. Jake decided to take his performance to the next level. He had seen videos online where tourists would walk directly in front of guards when they were marching, forcing them to either stop or march around the obstacle. Jake thought this would make the perfect climax to his social media content. "Watch this, everyone," Jake announced loudly, positioning himself directly in Private Thompson's path. "Let's see what happens when an unmovable object meets an unstoppable force." Private Thompson was scheduled to march to a different position in exactly 30 seconds. This was part of his regular patrol routine, and Jake had unknowingly positioned himself directly in the guard's predetermined path. The crowd grew quiet, sensing that something significant was about to happen. What most tourists don't understand is that these guards have strict protocols they must follow. When their duties require them to move, they will move, regardless of what obstacles might be in their way. They are trained to give one loud warning, and if that warning is ignored, they are authorized to continue their duties by any means necessary. Detective Inspector Collins spoke urgently into her radio. "Control, tourist is now blocking guards. Patrol route, preparing to intervene." "Negative," came the response. "Let the guard handle protocol first. Stand by for backup if needed." Jake stood directly in front of Private Thompson, grinning at his phone camera and making victory gestures. He had no idea that he was about to experience a reality check that would be far more dramatic than anything he had planned. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Private Thompson's internal clock told him it was time to march to his next position. Without any change in his facial expression, he took his first step forward. Jake was still standing in his path, now just inches away from the guard. "Make way for the Queen's Guard," Private Thompson bellowed at the top of his lungs. The sound was so sudden and powerful that Jake jumped backward in shock. The guard's voice echoed off the palace walls like a thunderclap, causing nearby tourists to gasp and step back instinctively. Jake's phone nearly slipped from his shaking hands, but Jake's surprise quickly turned back into excitement. "Oh man, he actually talked," Jake shouted to the crowd. "I got him to break character. This is perfect." Jake quickly repositioned himself, back in the guard's path, thinking he had discovered the secret to getting reactions. He held up his phone to capture what he thought would be another great moment for his social media accounts. Private Thompson continued his march without hesitation. He had given the required warning, and now he was authorized to proceed with his duties regardless of obstructions. His heavy black boots struck the cobblestones with mechanical precision as he advanced toward Jake's position. Jake stood his ground, confident that the guard would stop or walk around him. After all, Jake reasoned, these were just ceremonial soldiers putting on a show for tourists. Surely they wouldn't actually march through a person, right? Mike could see the determination in the guard's face and realized his friend was making a terrible mistake. "Jake, move!" he shouted. "He's not stopping." But Jake was too focused on his phone screen and the reactions from the crowd to pay attention to his friend's warning. He stood firm, expecting the guard to swerve at the last second or stop completely. Private Thompson marched straight toward Jake with unwavering determination. His training had prepared him for exactly this situation. Tourists who interfered with guard duties after being warned were subject to immediate physical removal from the area. The guard was authorized to use reasonable force to continue his patrol. With 3 steps remaining between them, Jake finally looked up from his phone and saw the serious expression on Private Thompson's face. The guard's eyes were focused straight ahead, looking right through Jake as if he didn't exist. For the first time, Jake began to realize that this might not go the way he had planned. Wait, Jake said, raising his hands but not moving, from the guard's path. I'm just playing around, man, chill out. Private Thompson never changed his pace or expression. 2 steps away. 1 step away. The collision was swift and decisive. Private Thompson's shoulder connected with Jake's chest, sending the young American stumbling backward and spinning to the side. The guard continued his march without breaking stride, his boots clicking rhythmically on the cobblestones as if nothing had happened. Jake caught himself before falling completely, but his phone went flying through the air and clattered across the courtyard. The crowd erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Some tourists applauded the guard's actions, while others looked shocked by what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" Jake said breathlessly, looking around at the crowd. "He actually knocked me over, that's assault!" Several British tourists shook their heads in disgust. They knew that Jake had brought this on himself by failing to respect the guard's authority and duties. The elderly British man from earlier called out, "You were warned, you foolish boy. That's what happens when you don't show proper respect." Jake scrambled to retrieve his phone, checking to make sure it wasn't broken. Fortunately, it had survived the fall with only minor scratches. But as he looked at the video he had captured, Jake realized that the incident looked much different from his perspective than it probably looked to everyone else. Sarah rushed over to help Jake up, her face red with embarrassment. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Jake said, brushing off his clothes. "But did you see what that psycho did to me? He deliberately knocked me down for no reason." Mike joined them, shaking his head. "Jake, he warned you to move. You stood right in his way on purpose. What did you think was going to happen?" Detective Inspector Collins had watched the entire incident unfold and was now approaching their group. She had already decided that Jake's behavior warranted an official intervention, but the physical contact between him and the guard made this a more serious matter that required immediate attention. Jake was still reviewing his phone footage when he noticed a woman in civilian clothes walking directly toward him with a very serious expression on her face. Something about her confident stride and purposeful approach made Jake's stomach tighten with worry. "Excuse me," Detective Inspector Collins said as she approached Jake's group, pulling out her official identification. "I'm Detective Inspector Collins with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you about your interaction with the Queen's guard." Jake's confidence immediately evaporated when he saw the police badge. This was not how he had imagined his London adventure going. Sarah grabbed his arm tightly, while Mike stepped back with a worried expression. "Is there a problem, officer?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual despite his obvious nervousness. "I was just taking some photos and having fun with the guards. It's not illegal to take pictures, right?" Detective Inspector Collins had dealt with hundreds of similar situations over her career. She could immediately tell that Jake didn't understand the seriousness of what he had done or the potential consequences he was now facing. "Sir, what's your name and nationality?" she asked, pulling out a small notepad. "Jake Morrison, I'm from Texas," he replied, glancing around nervously at the crowd that was still watching the situation unfold. "Look, if this is about that little bump with the guard, that was totally his fault. I was just standing there and he knocked me down for no reason." The detective's expression remained professional but stern. "Mr. Morrison, you were observed interfering with a Queen's Guard in the performance of his duties. You ignored a direct command to move aside, and you deliberately obstructed his patrol route. These are serious offenses under British law." Jake felt his heart rate increasing. This was supposed to be a fun tourist activity, not a legal problem. He looked at Sarah and Mike for support, but they both appeared just as worried as he felt. "I didn't know I was breaking any laws," Jake said defensively. "I'm just a tourist. I thought these guards were like street performers or something. Nobody told me there were rules about taking photos with them." Detective Inspector Collins had heard this excuse many times before. "Mr. Morrison, ignorance of the law is not a defense. The Queen's Guard are active military personnel protecting a royal residence. Interfering with their duties is equivalent to interfering with police officers or other security personnel." The detective continued taking notes while explaining the situation. "You're currently being detained for questioning regarding potential Charges of obstructing a police officer, disturbing the peace, and interfering with royal security operations. Jake's mouth fell open. Detained? You mean like arrested? This is crazy. I'm just a college student on vacation. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody or cause any real problems. Sir, I need you to remain calm and cooperate fully. Detective Inspector, Collins replied. The seriousness of this situation depends largely on your attitude and willingness to understand what you've done wrong. More plainclothes security officers had appeared around them, forming a discreet circle that prevented Jake from simply walking away. Other tourists continued to watch and record the unfolding drama, many of them now posting videos and photos to social media platforms. Sarah was near tears. Officer, please, Jake didn't mean any harm. He's just young and stupid sometimes. This is our first trip to London, and we didn't know the rules. The detective looked at Sarah with some sympathy. Miss, I understand this is stressful, but your friend made a series of poor choices that escalated into a serious situation. The guard showed remarkable restraint in his response. Jake was beginning to realize that his social media stunt might have consequences far beyond what he had anticipated. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to jail? That depends on several factors, Detective Inspector Collins explained. We need to complete our investigation, take statements from witnesses, and review the video footage from security cameras and tourist phones. What Jake didn't know was that Buckingham Palace and the surrounding area are monitored by hundreds of high-definition security cameras. Every moment of his interaction with Private Thompson had been recorded from multiple angles, providing clear evidence of his behavior and the guard's professional response. The good news, the detective continued, is that the guard wasn't injured, and you didn't attempt to damage any property or pose a serious security threat. However, your actions were disruptive, disrespectful, and potentially dangerous. Mike finally spoke up. What can we do to make this right? Jake realizes he made a mistake and he's sorry for what happened. Detective Inspector Collins looked at Jake directly. Is that true, Mr. Morrison? Do you understand why your behavior was inappropriate, and are you genuinely sorry for disrespecting the Queen's Guard? Jake looked around at the faces staring at him, his worried friends, the stern detective, and the crowd of disapproving tourists. For the first time since arriving in London, he began to understand that his actions had real consequences. I guess I didn't think about it from his perspective, Jake said quietly. I was just trying to make some funny videos for my friends back home. I didn't realize these guards were real soldiers doing an important job. The detective made more notes while Jake spoke. Mr. Morrison, these guards have often served in combat zones like Afghanistan and Iraq. They've earned the right to perform their duties with dignity and respect. When you treated one of them like a street performer or a tourist attraction, you dishonored his service and his sacrifice. Jake felt genuinely ashamed for the first time. He had been so focused on creating entertaining content that he hadn't considered the human being behind the uniform. The guard he had harassed was a real person with real feelings, real experiences, and real responsibilities. What happens now? Jake asked, his voice much quieter than before. Detective Inspector Collins closed her notepad and looked at Jake seriously. Now we're going to have a very important conversation about respect, consequences, and how you can make this situation right. Detective Inspector Collins escorted Jake and his friends to a nearby security office within the palace complex. The small room contained a desk, several chairs, and official portraits of the royal family on the walls. Jake sat nervously while the detective reviewed security footage on a computer screen. Mr. Morrison, I want you to watch this video and tell me what you see, she said, turning the monitor toward him. Jake watched himself dancing around Private Thompson, making faces, and eventually blocking the guard's path. Seeing his behavior from an outside perspective was eye-opening and embarrassing. He looked like a disrespectful tourist making fun of a professional soldier. I look like a complete idiot, Jake admitted quietly. I can see why people were getting upset with me. The guard showed remarkable patience and professionalism, Detective Inspector Collins pointed out. He ignored your antics for nearly 15 minutes before you forced him to take action by blocking his patrol route. Jake nodded, feeling more ashamed with each passing minute. I thought I was being funny, but I can see now that I was just being a jerk to someone who was trying to do his job. The detective leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, I have some options for how to handle this situation. The formal charges I mentioned earlier could result in fines, possible jail time, and a permanent criminal record that would follow you for the rest of your life. Sarah gasped and grabbed Jake's hand. Mike looked pale and worried. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized how serious this had become. However, Detective Inspector Collins continued, because this appears to be a case of ignorance rather than malice, and because you're showing genuine remorse, I'm willing to offer you an alternative. Jake looked up hopefully. What kind of alternative? The British military has an educational program for tourists who have incidents with the Queen's Guard. Instead of pressing formal charges, you would spend a day learning about the history, training, and sacrifices of these soldiers. You would also write a formal letter of apology to Private Thompson. Yes, Jake said immediately. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I don't want criminal charges, and I genuinely want to understand what I did wrong. Detective Inspector. Collins smiled slightly for the first time since approaching them. The program includes a meeting with retired guards who can explain their experiences, a tour of military training facilities, and a presentation about the role these soldiers play in protecting the royal family. Jake felt relieved but also curious. When would this happen? We're only in London for a few more days. The program runs tomorrow morning, the detective explained. It's designed specifically for situations like this. You'll spend about 6 hours learning about military service and the importance of respect for those who serve their country. Mike leaned forward. What about Sarah and me? Are we in trouble too? You two are free to continue your vacation, Detective Inspector Collins replied. You weren't involved in the disruptive behavior, though I hope you've learned something from watching your friend's experience. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand. We'll wait for you. This is more important than sightseeing. The detective handed Jake several forms to sign. By agreeing to this program, you're acknowledging that your behavior was inappropriate and accepting responsibility for your actions. If you complete the program successfully and write a sincere apology letter, no formal charges will be filed. Jake signed the papers quickly, grateful for a second chance. Thank you for not ruining my life over this stupid mistake. I promise I'll take this seriously. One more thing, Detective Inspector Collins added. I need you to delete the videos you took of your interaction with the guard, and you cannot post any content on social media about this incident without permission. Jake hesitated for a moment, thinking about all the potential likes and shares he would be giving up. But then he realized that exploiting this situation for social media would be just as disrespectful as his original behavior. Okay, I'll delete everything, Jake agreed, pulling out his phone and removing the videos while the detective watched. As they prepared to leave the security office, Detective Inspector Collins gave Jake one final piece of advice. Mr. Morrison, when you travel to other countries, remember that you're representing your own country as well as yourself. Your behavior reflects on all American tourists who visit Britain. Jake nodded seriously. I understand. I'm embarrassed that I gave Americans a bad reputation today. The good news is that tomorrow you'll have a chance to learn something valuable and show proper respect, the detective said. Many people don't get second chances like this. As they walked back, through the palace gates, Jake felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He was grateful to avoid criminal charges, but he was also genuinely curious about what he would learn in the educational program. Sarah walked beside him quietly before finally speaking. Jake, I'm proud of you for taking responsibility and agreeing to learn from this. I was so focused on getting good content for social media that I forgot these guards are real people, Jake replied. Tomorrow I want to understand what their job is really like and why it matters. Mike nodded approvingly. Maybe this whole experience will make you think twice before you do something like this again. Jake looked back at the palace, where Private Thompson was still standing at his post, continuing his duty with the same professional dignity he had shown throughout Jake's entire disruption. The guard had handled the situation perfectly, while Jake had learned a valuable lesson about respect and consequences. Tomorrow is going to be interesting, Jake said. I have a feeling I'm going to learn more than I expected. What Jake didn't know was that the educational program was designed to be challenging and eye-opening. He was about to discover just how much training, sacrifice, and dedication went into becoming a Queen's Guard, and why tourists like him needed to show proper respect. Jake arrived at the military training facility early the next morning, feeling nervous but determined to make the most of this educational opportunity. He was greeted by Sergeant Major William Hayes, a retired Queen's Guard with 30 years of military service. "Mr. Morrison, welcome to your education," Sergeant Major Hayes said with a firm handshake. "Today you're going to learn what it really means to serve as a Queen's Guard." The program began with a presentation about the history and traditions of the Queen's Guard, dating back centuries. Jake learned that these weren't just ceremonial positions, but elite soldiers chosen from the finest regiments in the British Army. "Every guard you see at Buckingham Palace has earned that position through exceptional service," Sergeant Major Hayes explained. "Many are combat veterans who have risked their lives defending freedom around the world." Jake watched video testimonials from current and former guards who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other dangerous locations. He heard stories of courage, sacrifice, and dedication that made his social media antics seem incredibly trivial and disrespectful. "Private Thompson, the guard you harassed yesterday, served 2 tours in Afghanistan," the sergeant major revealed. "He was wounded by an improvised explosive device while protecting a convoy of humanitarian supplies. That young man has earned more respect in his military career than most people receive in a lifetime." Jake felt his stomach tighten with shame. He had treated a war hero like a circus performer, completely ignorant of the man's service and sacrifice. The next part of the program involved physical training exercises designed to give Jake a tiny taste of military discipline. He attempted to stand at attention for just 10 minutes while the sergeant major explained the mental focus required. "Guards stand motionless for hours in all weather conditions," Sergeant Major Hayes said as Jake struggled to maintain his position. "They ignore pain, discomfort, and distractions while remaining constantly alert for security threats." Jake's legs began shaking after just 5 minutes. His back ached, and he couldn't stop fidgeting despite his best efforts. The idea of standing perfectly still for hours while tourists made jokes and took pictures seemed impossible. "This is incredibly hard," Jake admitted. "I had no idea how much concentration and strength this requires." "And you're doing this for 10 minutes in comfortable conditions," the sergeant major pointed out. "Imagine doing it for hours in rain, snow, or blazing heat while maintaining complete focus on potential security threats." Jake met with 3 retired guards who shared their experiences of dealing with disrespectful tourists over the years. They explained how difficult it was to maintain professionalism when people treated them like objects rather than human beings. "The worst part isn't the physical discomfort," explained former guard David Clark. "It's when tourists treat you like you're not a real person. They make jokes about you, mock your uniform, and act like your service means nothing." Another retired guard, Michael Brown, showed Jake photographs from his deployment in Afghanistan. "I served alongside soldiers who didn't come home. When tourists make fun of my uniform or my duty, they're disrespecting not just me, but every soldier who has served and sacrificed." Jake listened to these stories with growing understanding and remorse. He began to comprehend the depth of disrespect he had shown to Private Thompson and what the guard's uniform truly represented. The final part of the program involved writing his apology letter to Private Thompson. Jake spent over an hour crafting a sincere message that acknowledged his ignorance, expressed genuine remorse, and promised to treat military personnel with proper respect in the future. "Dear Private Thompson," Jake wrote, "I want to apologize for my disrespectful behavior yesterday at Buckingham Palace. I now understand that I treated you like an object for my entertainment, instead of recognizing you as a professional soldier and a human being who has served our countries with honor and courage." He continued, "Learning about your service in Afghanistan and the sacrifices you've made has opened my eyes to how wrong my actions were. You deserved respect and gratitude from me, not mockery and harassment. I promise to be a better person and to honor military service wherever I encounter it." Sergeant Major Hayes reviewed Jake's letter and nodded approvingly. "This shows genuine understanding and growth, Mr. Morrison. I believe you've learned something valuable from this experience." As the program concluded, Jake felt profoundly changed by what he had learned. The guards he had seen as tourist attractions were actually elite soldiers with incredible stories of service and sacrifice. "Thank you for teaching me this lesson," Jake told Sergeant Major Hayes as they shook hands goodbye. "I'm embarrassed by how I acted yesterday, but I'm grateful for the chance to understand and grow." "Remember this feeling," the Sergeant Major advised. "Use it to make better choices and show proper respect to those who serve, whether they're military personnel, police officers, or anyone else performing their duty." Jake returned to his hotel that evening to find Sarah and Mike waiting anxiously for news. He spent an hour telling them everything he had learned about the Queen's Guard and the experiences of the soldiers who serve in those positions. "I feel like a completely different person than I was yesterday," Jake admitted. "I'm actually ashamed of those videos I was planning to post. Making fun of a war veteran for social media likes is disgusting." Sarah hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you for learning from this and changing your attitude." Mike nodded in agreement. "This sounds like it was better than any tourist attraction we could have visited." 2 weeks after returning to Texas, Jake received a response letter from Private Thompson. The guard thanked him for his sincere apology and expressed appreciation for Jake's willingness to learn about military service. Private Thompson wrote that he hoped Jake's experience would help other tourists understand the importance of showing respect to service members. Jake framed both letters and hung them in his dorm room as a reminder of the lesson he had learned in London. He also began volunteering with a local veterans organization, helping former soldiers transition back to civilian life. When his friends asked about his London trip, Jake told them about his educational experience, rather than the embarrassing incident that led to it. He encouraged other students to research local customs and show respect when traveling abroad. "I thought I was just having fun, but I was actually being cruel to someone who had served his country with honor," Jake would explain. "That guard taught me more about respect and dignity than any college class ever has." Jake's social media accounts, which had once been filled with silly pranks and attention-seeking content, gradually shifted toward posts about supporting veterans and military families. He used his platform to educate his followers about the sacrifices made by service members around the world. 6 months later, Jake organized a fundraiser at his university to support wounded veterans. The event raised over $10,000 and attracted attention from local news media. When interviewed, Jake spoke about how a brief encounter with a British guard had changed his perspective on service and sacrifice. "Sometimes it takes a moment of genuine shame to make you realize you need to become a better person," Jake reflected. "I'm grateful for that wake-up call, even though it was embarrassing at the time." The incident at Buckingham Palace had started as a thoughtless attempt to create viral content, but it ended up transforming Jake into a more thoughtful and respectful young man. He learned that every person in uniform has a story, and that story deserves respect rather than ridicule. Private Thompson continued his distinguished service with the Queen's Guard, eventually earning promotion and recognition for his professionalism and dedication. He never forgot the young American tourist who had learned to see him as a human being rather than just a tourist attraction. Jake's story spread through social media in a different way than he had originally planned. Instead of going viral for disrespecting a guard, his story became known as an example of how travel experiences can teach valuable lessons about respect, humility, and personal growth. Years later, Jake would return to London as a different person. When he saw the Queen's Guard performing their duties, he watched with admiration and gratitude rather than looking for entertainment opportunities. He understood that these soldiers represented something far more important than social media content. They represented service, sacrifice, and the highest ideals of military duty. The lesson Jake learned that day in London stayed with him for the rest of his life. Everyone deserves respect, especially those who have chosen to serve something greater than themselves. It was a lesson that made him a better person, a better American, and a better citizen of the world.